Bookish content has absolutely blown up in the past few years on TikTok. Even if you walk into a bookstore, there will be stands with BookTok books. There are so many novels that TikTok has blown up, and there are so many little sub-communities on TikTok that it's very easy to lose oversight. So this video is a feverish attempt of providing an oversight of all of the main TikTok book recommendations and give you an indication of which ones you should read and which ones you shouldn't. As you can see behind me, there are all these little islands of sub-communities within TikTok, and we will go through each little island to discuss the most popular books in that community. And we'll fill in this web as we go. I imagine us travelers navigating the vast sea of TikTok book recommendations as we sail the waves of the algorithm. Why am I doing this? I'm trying desperately to justify to myself why I'm using my precious living space to make this TikTok mood board. If you don't want to get your book recommendations from a random TikTok algorithm but would prefer a professional team of book lovers to give you a curated selection, you should check out the sponsor of today's video, which is Book of the Month. They are a fast-growing and super popular online service for readers. Every month their team creates a selection of new and early releases, and you pick out the one that you are the most interested in. It's completely risk-free because you can skip anytime you want without any charge. Plus, they are very cheap for a hardcover book, especially in December, because they have a deal where you can get your first hardcover for only $5 if you use the code WONDER. So these are the books that I picked out for this month. First, we have The Circus Train. I chose this one because it's said to be really great for people who are a fan of the night circus, which I really am. And I also chose Kiss Her Once for me because I was really looking for an adult romance with two women, and that's exactly what this is. So I was really happy to see this one in the selection this month. And if you want to see all of their other options for the month of December, you should go to their website, bookofthemonth.com, and you can use the code WONDER to get your first hardcover book for only $5. So I will link it in the description and you can check it out. So in order to fully understand what we are about to do here, we first must answer a very important question, and that is, what makes a TikTok book? There's really no need for me to pull out the whiteboard, but I just want to do it, okay? Because you may think, what makes a book blow up on TikTok? Is it just because the book is so good that everyone's talking about it? No. And I don't mean to imply that I think books that blow up on TikTok are not good. I just mean that there are some very few specific things that do very well on video, and that is what makes certain books blow up. Anything that is more friendly to the TikTok algorithm will be more likely to blow up. So the first thing is crying. If there are a lot of people on TikTok filming themselves crying to a book or finishing a book and crying at the ending, that is very sensational. It's more likely to blow up and people are like, ooh, I want to know what's up with that one, and then the book becomes more popular. Second, in the same vein of creating some kind of big emotional reaction, any book with a very high shock factor is also more likely to blow up on TikTok. There are so many videos of people finishing their books and being like completely shocked by something. Not only is it a fun video to watch, so it's algorithm friendly, it also makes people curious because they're like, oh, I want to know what this shocking thing is, and these kind of books tend to blow up on TikTok. The third one is actually quite different. It's aesthetically pleasing books. There is this very specific trend on TikTok where books that just look really, really pretty tend to blow up because, again, TikTok is a video platform. So if you can make a video of you unboxing this extremely pretty edition of a book, those videos will get a lot of views. And then more people will know about the book, and more people want to make a video of them buying that book and unboxing it because they know they're going to get views from it. 4 is books that are spicy. If you talk about a book being really spicy, people are going to be interested in it. And then last but definitely not least, the book's just really good. Don't get me wrong, there are definitely plenty of books that blow up on TikTok because there are just so many people who absolutely love it and want to recommend it to everyone. Okay, now that we know what makes a TikTok book, we have a little bit more framework, a little bit more context as we will go through all of the TikTok books for all the little subcategories that I have defined for myself. Of course, I cannot talk about every single TikTok book ever because there are so many books that blow up on TikTok. I have narrowed it down to the most well-known TikTok books. Let's start with our first category, and that is books that just blew up because they made a lot of people cry. The Song of Achilles. In order to make the overview of TikTok books as complete as possible, I'm also including books that I have personally not read, but I've done my best to do research on these books, so I can still tell you a little bit about who I think would enjoy these books and who I think wouldn't. If I have read the book, I will let you know, but of course my opinion is just my opinion, and I will keep in mind that different people like different things. But The Song of Achilles is a very sad romance fantasy surrounding Achilles, of course. And the reason a lot of people love this is because it's extremely heartbreaking, gut-wrenching fantasy. A lot of people who didn't enjoy it because they were expecting a little bit more mythology, a little bit more historical accuracy, and that is not in this book. They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. Again, a very sad gay romance. Seems to be a theme. Actually, sad gay romance really is a theme on TikTok. People love this because it really deals with themes like death. And it includes a lot of diverse characters. The main criticism that I've seen of this book is that people thought that the sci-fi elements were not really fleshed out. A lot of people talk about how this book feels very didactic and forced. Of course, I could not talk about books that make people cry without mentioning A Little Life. This is one of those books that is so devastating that it will stick with you forever. It's literary fiction and it's widely loved for just the emotional reaction that it can elicit from you. Conversely, this can also be why a lot of people don't like it, because the people who criticize it for using trauma just for shock and not actually handling it with care. Then we get to the category of books that blow up because they're very shocking, and sometimes there's kind of a crossover with the crying, because sometimes a book can be very shocking and then the revelation is sad, so it kind of also makes you cry. And the book that really fits this is We Were Liars by Lockhart. I actually read this. I read this book when I was 18 years old and remember being extremely shocked by the plot twist and also crying my eyes out. I think If We Were Liars is great if you are new to thrillers and new to unreliable narrators, but if you're already pretty used to that, you're probably going to be very underwhelmed by it and are more likely, I think, to guess the plot twist. And then there's another book that I think really blew up because of the shocking plot twist, and it is pretty much everything by Colleen Hoover, especially Verity, but we'll get to Colleen Hoover, okay? She's going to get her own special place on this board. When I asked you guys on my Instagram what you consider to be TikTok books, a lot of people just came with a bunch of author names, and there were 4 authors that really everyone was mentioning, that I also think are kind of the gateway. These 4 authors are kind of the gateway to everything else on TikTok. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, if you will. War, the first horseman, because nothing is more interesting than watching drama unfold between fictional celebrities. Taylor Jenkins Reid. Famine, here to remind you of how touch-starved you are. Emily Henry. Death. His growls of pleasure filled the tent, drowning out the cries of the injured and crying. Sarah J. Maas. And finally, Conquest, the author that has single-handedly conquered the entire publishing industry. Colleen Hoover. Let's start with our friend Colleen Hoover. I think there are bookstores that are, I think they can survive of just their sales of Colleen Hoover books. I'm personally not a fan of Colleen Hoover. I've only ever read Ugly Love, which I really didn't like, so I'm not interested in reading any more of her books, because why would I read a book that I already know is probably not going to be my thing? But she is widely loved. If you're looking for a story that is very sensational with a little bit of spice in there as well, Colleen Hoover is definitely for you. Great if you want entertainment, if your idea of entertainment is something that will also pull on your heartstrings. Let's start with It Ends With Us. This is a classic Colleen Hoover romance, full of emotion and heartbreak. It is mostly criticized for the same reason that almost all of Colleen Hoover's are criticized, and that is for its overuse of traumatic events and tragedy for shock and plot. Technically, almost all of Colleen Hoover books are TikTok books, but I chose this one because I think it's the most popular of her romance ones. And the other one I chose is Verity, because this one is different from her other books. It has been described as the book that is even enjoyed by people who normally dislike Colleen Hoover, because this one is a thriller. It's praised for its twists and turns and mind-blowing ending, which is why I said it also falls into the shocking category. Do I need to draw a line? Yes. Yet again, this book is criticized for its dismissive use of trauma and tragedy and using abuse just for the plots. Moving on to Sarah J. Maas. So I actually forgot to print out little covers for her books. I guess that is kind of an insight of my general opinion of Sarah J. Maas books. And I don't have a printer here, so you're just gonna have to imagine Sarah J. Maas books being put over here. First we have Throne of Glass, which I think is good if you are new to fantasy and would like a little bit of a young adult epic fantasy story. It's great if you enjoy stories with very powerful main characters with magic and fae. I don't think Throne of Glass is really great for very seasoned adult fantasy lovers. General rule for Sarah J. Maas books: if you like the idea of your main characters all being extremely powerful, extremely beautiful, the best in their field, etc., if you like that, Sarah J. Maas is for you. If you're like, I actually want my main characters to be slightly more underdogs, a little bit more flawed, then you're not gonna like Sarah J. Maas. Then we have ACOTAR, A Court of Thorns and Roses, if you like Throne of Glass, if you like fae stories, but you would just like to have them a little bit more spice, then there's A Court of Thorns and Roses for you. And lastly, The House of Earth and Blood, which is the only series of her that I haven't read, but I have heard a lot of people who typically don't like Sarah J. Maas do actually enjoy her House of Earth and Blood series. It's her adult fantasy series. It doesn't contain as much spice as ACOTAR, but it is more mature and it's more of an urban fantasy style story. Whereas ACOTAR and Throne of Glass are high fantasy. Now, if you have entered Book Talk, you have probably come across Colleen Hoover and Sarah J. Maas because those are the two main authors that will immediately be blasted to you on the algorithm. And if you've kind of walked around on this side of TikTok, you're very likely to reach the smut romance side of TikTok, also known as hashtag #SmutTok. This is where all the spicy books are being recommended. It's actually a very substantial part of Book Talk. It's a space where women are sharing all kinds of erotic novels with each other, with spice meters and tropes that are included. I've personally never really read a book recommended on SmutTok, but I've done my research, so I will give you a little bit overview of the most well-known ones. I feel like it all started with Den of Vipers. It really sounds like a published One Direction fanfiction, because we follow this feisty girl who is bought by these 4 men and she has to live with them and they now own her. What follows is just 700 pages of very dark and erotic content and just these men having their way with our main character. This is for people who really like the idea of very dark mafia romances. Anyone else seems to hate this book. The Twisted Love series by Anna Huang. We have 2 main characters with a very sad and broken past. Our hero male love interest is of course a millionaire. It contains tropes like brother's best friend, hates everyone but her, and Grumpy Sunshine. Grumpy Sunshine is a very popular trope on SmutTok and anywhere on TikTok actually. As with most of the books that I'm going to mention for SmutTok, it is really not for people who don't like very alpha love interest. The Fine Print. Based on the cover of this book, I'd always assumed that this was kind of historical or kind of dark academia, but apparently it just takes place in an amusement park. It's a boss-employee romance, another Grumpy Sunshine one. And again, it is great if you like your love interest to be very alpha and possessive, but if that's not your thing, you're gonna hate it. Of course, I could not make a video mentioning SmutTok without mentioning one, I think like one of the most well-known recommendations from like a little niche within SmutTok that was probably supposed to just stay within its little niche of people that are into that sort of thing, but then it kind of blew up, and that is of course Ice Planet Barbarians for those who are really into alien smut. The description of the book reads, "He's big, horned, blue, and really has a thing for me." I haven't read this, but judging from the reviews, this book is apparently surprisingly well written. It's just very ridiculous. Okay, so I mentioned that if you are on Sarah J Maas or Colleen Hoover TikTok, you are very likely to be funneled into smut talk. But if you very much into Sarah J Maas TikTok, you're also very likely to kind of continue then down the path to fantasy TikTok. Fantasy TikTok mostly recommends YA fantasy, so young adult fantasy, which makes sense because most of the people on TikTok are young adults. These books generally fall into the category of blowing up because people just genuinely really like them, not for their shock or their smut or because they make people cry, but because people are just very excited about them. And I love watching people get excited over fantasy books. Again, this is a very large community. There are tons and tons and tons of recommendations. I've just picked, I think, the 6 ones that I think blew up the most, and we'll go through them quickly. Six of Crows. Also one of my favorite books of all time. It's great if you like character-focused stories and heists with magic. The Cruel Prince. I also loved this one. This was marketed on TikTok mostly for it being an enemies to lovers romance because TikTok tends to mostly talk about tropes. And just like many people on TikTok, you will be disappointed in this book if you think it's just gonna be an enemies to lovers romance, because although it is an enemies to lovers romance, that's just kind of like in the backside of the story. It's mostly a political intrigue story about fae. So if that sounds like something that you're into, then you should read it. Highly recommend. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This is adult fantasy. It's pretty low on the fantasy side, so it's great if you want something a little bit more character focused, a little bit more rooted in our world, and if you want to read something that almost feels like a coming of age story. I also enjoyed this one, but was a little bit disappointed with the characterization. The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake, an example of how a self-published book can really blow up and gain commercial success through TikTok. This is dark academia, very character focused. I personally thought that they could put a little bit more effort into developing the magic system and the story. These Violent Delights, which definitely blew up because it was an enemies to lovers story, takes place in Shanghai. This is the only one of the bunch that I personally haven't read. It is said to be very addictive, but it is mainly criticized for being too juvenile. Okay, so we talked about Colleen Hoover and how it can get you to smut talk. Colleen Hoover can also get you to romance TikTok. And if we're talking about romance TikTok, we have to talk about the queen of romance TikTok, which is Emily Henry. Emily Henry writes the type of romance that will really tug on your heartstrings, and she really makes a point out of the idea that just because a book has a happy ending or has romance in it doesn't mean it can't have any kind of literary merit. And you can tell that in all of her romance books, she really tries to dive a little bit more deeper in all of the characters. I've read all of her books. The first one is Beach Read. This is Rivals to Lovers about 2 writers. It's very heartfelt and I think the most emotional one out of her 3 books. People We Meet on Vacation is also very heartfelt, but more for those who want a long-term friends to lovers kind of romance. And then we have Book Lovers, by far my personal favorite of Emily Henry, and that is because compared to the other ones, this one is the most light-hearted and the silliest. If you're sick of the grumpy sunshine trope where the woman is always the sunshine one, Book Lovers contains a very workaholic, high-strung main character, and it's more of a grumpy/grumpy romance. So from Emily Henry TikTok, you can easily move into a romance TikTok, which is also huge, but I've chosen 3 more books to talk about. I feel like there are kind of 2 sides of romance TikTok. On the one hand, you have the slightly more fun, silly reads, for which I chose 3 books, and then you can also kind of cross over more into smut talk with a little bit more spice. Or towards the Emily Henry side, which is a little bit more heartfelt and emotional. One romance book that you will find on every book talk table in a bookstore is The Love Hypothesis. Again, a grumpy sunshine book with fake dating between a PhD student and one of her professors. This is great for everyone who likes to read about women in STEM. Don't read this if you're sensitive to cringe or awkward moments. I personally thought this was just fine. Then we have The Spanish Love Deception. I personally absolutely hated this book. It's sorry. It's fake dating, and I think this one is especially great if you are really in those typical tall, brooding, dark-haired men. Very sad past. I think if you read a lot of romance, the Spanish love deception will feel a little bit cliche. And if you like your love interest to be a little bit more flawed, a little bit more interesting, go back to Emily Henry. Because that's one of the main things that I love about Emily Henry, is that not all of her love interests, they're not all like perfect specimen. And then last we have Red, White and Royal Blue. This is a very silly romance about a romance between the fictional first son of America and the fictional Prince of England. I personally thought this was fantastic. Okay, and then the last of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, we have Taylor Jenkins Reid. I personally, in my own very biased opinion, think her books are a very good example of books that blow up because they're genuinely just that good. All of her books contain very amazing interpersonal relationships. She creates fictional celebrities and then weaves such beautiful stories around them that just make you want to, it makes you feel like they're actually real. The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is the one that blew up the most, where you follow Evelyn Hugo and her life as an actress and her dealing with being a superstar but also secretly falling in love with a woman, which was definitely not accepted back in the, I think the 60s or 70s or 80s that this takes place. Most of Taylor Jenkins Reid's celebrity books take place in like the 60s, 70s or 80s. Now, if you are seeing a lot of Taylor Jenkins Reid, I feel like this is kind of the side that is most likely to get you to hot, sad girl book talk. It started out as a trend of books for hot girls, which somehow translated into books about mental illness. TikTok. Yeah, it's usually books about women in their 20s that are very disillusioned with life, trying to navigate growing up. This is also the space on TikTok where you are most likely to see classics being recommended, the most famous authors being mentioned being Sylvia Plath, Jane Austen, and Oscar Wilde. This side of TikTok definitely presents itself as a counter movement against the Colleen Hoover, Sarah J Maas side of TikTok. There's very much this idea of, oh, you recommend these types of books, whereas I read these types of books, we're not the same. One of the most commonly recommended hot girl sad books on this side of TikTok is My Year of Rest and Relaxation. If you're white in your 20s and disillusioned with life and you just want to read about a woman absolutely not giving a care at all and just doing whatever the heck she wants and being super mean, this is a book for you. Don't read this if you don't like women being gross. Normal People or just any Sally Rooney book. I got a tea stain on it. This is just a tea stain, sorry. This is a more melancholic romance. Like a lot of romances, Sally Rooney's romances also deal with a lot of traumatic events. They're not there for sensation, they're more there to just explore the characters and explore how it affects the interpersonal relationship between the characters. Just generally don't read Sally Rooney if you can't stand characters who don't know how to communicate with each other. Then for an essay collection, this is the only one out of the hot girl sad books that I personally haven't read. I actually love all of the hot girl sad books, so I should probably also read this one. It's Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton, which is an essay collection about being in your 20s. And then I've also decided to put The Secret History here because I really noticed that dark academia books are more likely to be recommended on this side of TikTok. This is great if you would like a book that will give you an interesting critique of academia and a very nuanced exploration of characters and their psychology. If you think this is going to be a fast-paced murder mystery, you will be disappointed. And then we've already gone to the last category, which is books that blew up because they're aesthetically pleasing. The first one is The Autonomy. This book, as you can kind of see from the picture, blew up because it had this beautiful gold foil on it, black sprayed edges. If you ordered it, it came in like a case and there were maps in it and glossaries and all this extra material, and it was just very mysterious. But from what I heard, the book itself isn't really that great, but it's pretty. And that's what works on video. The second book, I couldn't even print a picture of because I didn't even know the title. I could not find the title of this book. That's how mysterious it is. But you may have seen those videos on TikTok of people unboxing this book with a giant S On the cover and the inside is a story, but it's a story within a story because it's full of these annotations, and the annotations itself also tell a story. And the third and last book that I decided to put into this category is Kane's Jawbone. It's not necessarily super aesthetically pleasing, but video wise it's pleasing, because this is that book that is, I think it was published in 1934, and it's a mystery where the reader has to do the work themselves, because the idea of this book is that you as the reader have to find out the order of the pages. And if you find out the order of the pages, then you will get the full story. I haven't seen anyone solve it yet, but there are plenty of videos on TikTok of people trying to solve it, and therefore I'm putting it into this category because it just works well on video. No idea if the story is actually good. I don't think anyone can say if the story is good because no one managed to put it in the right order. The most important thing that you need to take away from this video is that this is kind of where everyone starts, and it kind of webs outward into all these different categories. If you want to find the books that are truly your kind of thing, you just need to let the algorithm do the work for you. Most of the book recommendations that I get from TikTok have a few thousand likes, and they don't necessarily blow up, but they are the type of books that are perfect for me. Don't judge BookTok by its algorithm friendly books. Because TikTok is so algorithm driven, it will just push forward whatever is loved by the majority. And as a result, you can tell that most of these books are about white straight people. There definitely are a lot of book recommendations on TikTok from authors of color or authors in the LGBT community. They just don't tend to blow up as much as these, again, because it's not as algorithm friendly. But I do want to give a quick shout out to some diverse books that did also become pretty big on TikTok, just not as big as these ones, but they still deserve a shout out. Legendborn for a YA Dark Academia fantasy, The Priory of the Orange Tree for an epic high fantasy with a female romance, Heartstopper, the cute gay graphic novel, She Who Became the Sun, another epic fantasy with a romance between two women, Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, a YA coming of age story with a romance between two boys, and Girl, Woman, Other, which is literary fiction where you follow all kinds of women of color in the UK. I do want to announce here that I'm planning on vlogging more during the month of December. I won't do full Vlogmas, like that's literally impossible, but I'm going to try to do a few more just general reading, cozy reading vlogs, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss them, because they're probably not going to end up on your homepage. And follow me on Instagram where I will announce when I upload. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you will stick around on my channel for more fun book videos. I really want to thank you for hanging out and spending your time with me today, chatting about books. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you soon with another video next week. Goodbye!